When I was a kid, I grew up in church, and the church that we went to would every now and then have like a Christian musician or artist that would come and perform, kind of like what we did a few weeks ago with the group that came in. And I still remember, I don't remember exactly how old I was, but just based on other childhood memories that I have, I'm thinking I was probably somewhere between 3 and 5 years of age, and a singer by the name of Mark Lowry came to sing at our church. And I don't know, some of you might know him from singing. I know he did some comedy and stuff like that as well. And I remember when he came, I've always been just amazed at musicians who can just sing such beautiful music. And that's one of the things that attracted me to my wife when I met her. And I was just, as just a little kid, I just thought he was awesome. And so at the urging of myself, my parents bought this album that he had. And this is the actual album. It's a little scratched up because it's, close to, 35, 40 years old. But this album they bought for me, and when I was just thinking about it, I was probably no older than my son Mikey when they bought this. I was, like I said, maybe 3 to 5. And I remember taking this album and listening to it probably hundreds of times. I would put it on in the my parents' bedroom where they had the record player and the stereo set up, and my mom made me put headphones on because she got tired of listening to it over and over again. But I would just sit there and sing and pretend like I was actually performing the song that was being performed on the record. And I remember there were a couple of songs that really stuck out to me as a kid, and one of them was a song called "The God That Cannot Fail." And one of the reasons that I liked that song is because it was about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which was a story that I knew from Sunday school. And so that to me was just like really cool. And I'm just going to show you some of the lyrics. I'm not going to share them all just in case maybe some of you haven't heard the story, and we're going to talk about it today. But kind of the chorus of the song says, "For he's the God Jehovah, so greatly to be praised. He's the God that'll take us over every mountain sin has raised. Out of all the gods men worship, there's a difference you can tell. He's the only one who ever gave his son. He's the God that cannot fail." And it just talks about in the song how he showed up in the lives of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so since that's the story that I wanted to share with you guys today, I entitled the message, "The God That Cannot Fail," just in honor of that song. So just wanted to kind of intro with that, and let's open in prayer, and then we'll get into the word. Lord, I thank you for this day that you've given us. I thank you that we have the opportunity today to come and worship you and just take some time out from the cares and the stress of the world, the things going on in our lives, and just come to church where we can get together with other believers and just praise you, Lord. And I just pray that you'll take the words that I'm about to speak and make them the words that you'd have me share. And I pray, Lord, that your Holy Spirit would just speak to everyone here and just have whatever it is that you want to communicate to us today, Lord. I just pray that that would be done. And we ask these things in your name. Amen. So I wanted to just start out with a little bit of history about these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so I knew some of the story, like I said, from Sunday school and hearing the song, but I wanted to kind of just dig into it a little bit deeper because I hadn't really brushed up on it in a while. And I realized that it was only in the 3rd chapter of Daniel. And so I kind of wanted to give a history over those first 2 chapters just to see where did these guys come from. They show up in this Bible, and this is the story that we know about most of them. The one I'm about to share, but where did they come from? And so in the 1st chapter of Daniel, it talks about there was a king of Judah named Jehoiakim, and I might be butchering that name, but I'm going to do my best with these. And then there was this king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. And so King Nebuchadnezzar basically made a siege on Jerusalem and overthrew the king of Judah at that time. And he took a lot of stuff out of the city and the temple that he wanted for himself and put it in the temples that they had. And then one of the things that he also wanted to do is he told them, his commanders and the people under him, hey, find some people out of this kingdom that we've just overthrown, and find some people who are really look healthy, they're good looking, they're young, they seem intelligent, and bring them to me, and we're going to train them with our customs, teach them our language, and we're going to take the best of the best. After a few years, will serve me as the king. And so they went out and they looked for these people, and they brought in, and 4 of them that they brought in were Daniel, which is the Daniel that wrote the book of Daniel, and then a guy by the name of Hananiah, which is, they went back and actually named him Shadrach, Mishael, who they named Meshach, and Azariah, who they named Abednego. And so I kind of found it interesting as I was reading through this that the Bible, and actually Daniel, they actually renamed, I think it was to Belteshazzar. And so later on in the book, Daniel refers to himself as Daniel, but he refers to his 3 buddies as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego rather than the names that they started off with. So I kind of found that a little bit interesting. And so one of the first things that it mentions about these guys, all other than the fact that they came from Judah, that this king brought them in, is that they were with Daniel when he told the king's guard that he didn't want to eat the king's meat or the wine that he was providing them. And he asked them, hey, instead of us eating the meat and drinking the wine, give us water and vegetables, and then after a period of time, bring us back in and see who looks healthier. And so they agreed to do that, and these guys were with him. And so when they came back and the king looked at them, he found that these 4 guys were head and shoulders healthier, smarter, better than all the other people that they'd brought in. So he actually, at that point, kind of brought them in and said, hey, these guys are going to be the ones who are going to be my servants and serve in the house of the king. So that's chapter 1 of Daniel. Then in chapter 2, that's the chapter that talks about Daniel and this king Nebuchadnezzar. He had a dream, and it kind of troubled him because he didn't know what it meant. So he goes to the wise men of the time and that are serving in his court and says, hey, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you guys to tell me what my dream was and then explain what it means. And all these guys were saying, hey, how about you tell us what your dream is, and then we'll tell you what it means. And that really made the king very angry. And this is one of the first places where we see kind of this King Nebuchadnezzar, that he's a little bit insane. And he said, if you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut into pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive gifts, rewards, and great honor. So it's a pretty extreme kind of guy. He's telling these people that he's going to basically have them cut into pieces and burn their houses down if they can't tell him what the dream is and what the interpretation is. The wise guys still try to argue with him about it, the fact that it's almost impossible for them to tell him actually what the dream is, that it would take a god to be able to do that. And so he basically tells them, how can I trust your interpretation of the dream if you can't even tell me what the dream is to start with? And so the king finally says, okay, listen, I'm going to order all of the magicians and the sorcerers, the wise people, to be killed because they can't tell me what this dream is. And so they get to the point where they're getting ready to kill Daniel and his friends, and Daniel speaks up and says, hey, listen, I think, I can do this. The Lord can reveal this to me. Let the king know not to kill any more people. that if you'll give me the evening to pray about it and think about it the next day, I'll go in and I'll talk to the king. So they gave him that chance, and that night the Lord kind of revealed the dream and its interpretation to Daniel, and he goes back in and explains it to the king, and it impresses the king. And I'm not going to go into detail about the dream and the interpretation. You guys can read that in Daniel 2 some other time, because that's not where I'm really going here. But the point is that the king was very impressed with Daniel, and he actually praised Daniel's God, saying, which is our God, the true God. It says, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and the revealer of secrets, since you could reveal the secret to me." So at that point, Daniel gets put in charge of over the whole province of Babylon, and as the chief administrator over the wise men of Babylon. So he got put in charge of all these guys that he kind of saved their lives, the ones who hadn't already been killed. And so then Daniel says, well, I've got these friends, these three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that are my good buddies. So when he addresses that with the king actually makes them over different provinces in Babylon. And so they were actually, at this point, when we get into chapter 3, which is the chapter that I really want to focus on, they're already kind of in this position of authority in the land. And so I'm going to put the scripture, this is Daniel chapter 3, on the screen, and we'll get into it. I'm sorry that the letters are a little small, but it's a lot of text, so I want to try to fit it on just a few slides here. It says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." So here's this king that just a chapter before had talked about how the God of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, how he was the King of kings and the Lord of lords and the revealer of secrets. And now he's made this golden image that he's asking people to bow down and worship when this music is played. And he's basically saying if they don't do it, they're going to be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So where he had acknowledged God in the second chapter, obviously his heart hasn't been changed at this point. So for the next slide, it says, "So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, and symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at the time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, 'O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. So there, obviously, these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these Chaldeans, who were some of the wise people who couldn't help the king in the chapter before, noticed that they weren't doing what the king had asked them to. And so they're basically reporting on them and trying to throw them under the bus to get them killed. And so the next slide, it says, then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? So here's the king. He brings them in, and he's basically saying, hey, if you want to change your mind, this is your last chance. You can worship the image. If not, you're going in the furnace. And then, again, very oddly, after praising the Lord, the previous chapter, he says, who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? And so then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. And so they're basically just saying, hey, if this is what you want to do, this is what you want to do, but we're not going to be a part of it. We're not going to worship the image. Next screen. So then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was so urgent and the furnace so exceedingly hot, the flames of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? And so, the king was just furious with these guys. He had them thrown in the furnace. The furnace was 7 times hotter than it normally was. It killed the guys that were just bringing them up to the furnace to throw them in. And he asked this question, and we'll see why. Next screen. They answered the king and said, true, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire, and the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. And so, amazingly, the Lord showed up for these guys. He showed up in the fire with them, and when the king called them out, they walked out, didn't even smell of fire on their clothes. Nothing was burned or singed. Next slide. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut into pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And so at the end of this particular story here, the king again has to acknowledge how awesome our God is, and actually ended up promoting these guys in their positions that he had originally placed them in. And so I remember as a kid, reading this story and just being so impressed and thought these guys were so awesome that they stood up to this king in the name of God. And I thought it was so cool how, God just supernaturally showed up and protected them in that particular instance. And so as I'm older now, there's some other things that I think about. And so there's a few thoughts that came to my mind that I just kind of wanted to share with you guys. The first is kind of the main thought that I had about this, and that thought is this: it doesn't matter the position you are in or where you are. At some point, you may be faced to make a decision to either disobey God and seemingly avoid conflict, shame, hurt, death, or to stand for God and face what seems certain conflict, shame, injury, or death. And so what I mean by that is these guys were in a position where they were exiled from their land, but they had found favor with the king and the government. The chapter before, the king had just talked about how awesome their God was. And so they were kind of in dealing with things the best they could for the situation they were in. They may even have felt kind of comfortable at this point, hey, we're kind of in charge somewhat here. But then, they were hit with this decision do we stand up for what we know is right and not bow down to this God and get thrown into the fiery furnace and probably die? Or do we go along and just bow down? We'll probably keep what we have. And, that second time when the king gave him a second chance, he might have even, rewarded them for doing that. Who knows? Or he might have killed him anyway. He was kind of crazy. We're not sure. But I started thinking to myself, there might be, some point where I'm faced with a decision like that. And then I started thinking that there's probably times when I have been faced with decisions like that in the past. A decision where you know what the right thing to do is, but you know that if you do that right thing, it's going to be hard. And you kind of think in your mind, hey, if I don't do what's right, I can probably justify it because the consequence of doing what's right was so bad. But, then where does that leave me? So what would you guys do if you were in that situation? Have you ever thought about it? Most of us are blessed with what we have, with a roof over our heads, clothes to wear, food to eat, money to spend on things that we want. Some of us may have more than others. But, and even in our culture, just like then where the chapter before the king was acknowledging God, even today, most of our political leaders, whether they act like it or not, would say, hey, we believe in God. But, then we see the kind of control that those political leaders can have on our society, just with the things that have been going on recently with the pandemic we've been in, and how, they were able to successfully close down churches for a couple of months. And it seems like every time you turn around, they're kind of into this and that. And what would happen if one day in our land, it's said that unless we participate in something that is obviously sinful, or if we do something that God's commanded us to do, then the law would be that we get put in jail, or that we get beaten, or we get put to death. Because in a lot of places in the world, that's the reality. And, to say that it couldn't happen here where we are is a little naive. And it can happen if we don't, as Christians, step up to the plate um, and say we're going to do what the Lord asks us to do regardless. And so we need to be prepared and be ready to honor God no matter what. And if we want him to continue to bless us and our families and our churches and our nation. A circumstance that I was reminded of in thinking about this thought is back when I was in college, we went to Virginia Tech, and at that point it was about a 5-hour drive to get there or back. And I remember I used to dread making that trip. I wanted to come home and visit my family, but at the same time, that drive, just especially by myself, seemed pretty, not looking forward to it. And so what we would do is sometimes I would bring a friend along with me, or I would go along with a friend when they visited their family, kind of break up the monotony of the drive. And I still remember in that 5-hour time, just starting up conversations with some of the friends that I was traveling with. And this one circumstance I'm thinking of, I'm still friends with this guy to this day, and he's a Christian. And we were talking, and one of the things I used to like to do, just because we're silly, we're college kids, we would play this game where we'd say, hey, would you rather, drink a bottle of hot sauce or walk across a bed of coals, and see what the other person said. And then we talk about the pros and cons, and just how we would go about making choices and difficult decisions. And so, I was a little bit crazy, and so I thought I would take it one step further and see what this guy would be willing to do. I said, and this might sound a little disturbing, but just remember I was about 18 or 19 years old at the time. So I said, hey, if a criminal came, and let's say he kidnapped your parents and said he was going to kill your parents if you didn't do this or that, what would you do? And so I started out with just some crazy things like running around the neighborhood without any clothes on, or something crazy, just to see what he would say. And he's like, oh, well, as long as there's nobody out there, whatever. So then I started getting into some things that were a little crazier. And I remember at some point I said something that would have been against what God's commanded. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but knowing my brain and how I was thinking at the time, it was probably something like, would you kill an innocent person if they said, hey, if you don't do this, we're going to kill your parents? And I remember his answer to me, right away with no discussion, was, no, I wouldn't do that. I said, okay. I wasn't surprised by the ultimate answer, but I was surprised that he answered me so quickly. So I was like, what are your thoughts on that? And he said, I can't control what this evil person's doing, but I can control what I do. And I'm not going to do something that God's commanded me not to do just because this person wants to do something wrong and bad. He said, I don't know what I would do, but I know I wouldn't do that. He said, I don't know if I'd fight back or just do nothing. I would have to see where God led me at that point in time. And so I was just like, okay, I wasn't expecting, him to take it so seriously, but his answer kind of stuck with me. And he said, I would just trust God that if it was his will that my parents not die, he would find a way other than me going against his commands. And so that situation, when I thought about it, it really fit this story. Here's these guys being faced with this decision, and even though they did have faith that God could save them, and they did say that he would deliver them from the king's hand, I don't know, in reading the text there, the way they worded it, it was like, God can deliver us. he will deliver us from your hand. I'm not sure if they said that more emphatically because they're thinking, if we die, we'll be delivered from the hand of the king. If we live, he's going to deliver us from the hand of the king. But, they did say, but even if he doesn't, deliver us from the fire, we're still not going to do it. And so I think we all have to have those, discussions with ourselves is how will we handle these situations, when they come. And so a couple of kind of sub thoughts to that I think will kind of help us keep things in perspective if we're faced with these decisions and when we're faced with these decisions. The first one is God blesses those that choose to follow his commandments every time and often shows up in supernatural ways. So when we stand up for God against those that would harm us, we put the responsibility of our defense in the hands of God, which are the only hands that can actually defend us. God can then work out the situation for his glory. And like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they said what they said, again, they said, but if he doesn't, we'll still not bow before the idol. And when we put our defense in God's hand, many times he will show up in supernatural way and provide a way out or deliver us from the situation or bring a change of heart to those who would do us harm. And so, immediately I was thinking of, Abraham when he sacrificed Isaac because God had asked him to, even though that was a difficult decision. And he went all the way to the point where he's about to put his son on the altar, and God intervenes with providing a lamb as an alternate sacrifice. I thought about numerous battles in the Old Testament where, the children of Israel were way outnumbered, and God asked them to do things that didn't make sense, but they did them a lot of times anyway, and God showed up and helped them win the battle. When the children of Israel had been bitten by snakes and were dying, these poisonous snakes, and God told Moses to lift up a snake in the wilderness and tell them everybody who looks to that will be healed. Just numerous stories of where God shows up for people when they follow his commands and they make good decisions, even when they don't make sense and they're feeling overwhelmed. Sometimes, though, it may be his will for us to suffer for his sake, for some greater plan or picture, but he promises that he'll bless us through that suffering. In Matthew 5:10-12, it says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." And so in that verse, it just says, hey, if you are in a situation like that, you choose to do the right thing and you're punished, blessed are you. And talks about how you should count that as a blessing. And even though we don't understand it, there's a lot of stories in the Bible too that talk about people going through really hard times and God supernaturally showed up in their lives. And I'm thinking of Stephen when he was stoned and he saw the heavens open up and saw Jesus, right before he died. I just think about those things, no matter how bad we think the circumstance we're about to go through is, and it may be bad, God, when he's walking with us, will help us through it, and he'll bless us on the end if we continue to honor him. Another promise that I noticed, and I was talking to Gary about this, the Bible study that we're doing, our memory verse most recently was Isaiah 43, 1-2, that says, "But now, thus says the Lord, who created you, O Jacob, and he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flames scorch you." And I'd heard that verse before, but when I heard it in our Bible study and I was already knew that I was going to be talking about this story, I started thinking, it specifically says in here, when you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flames scorch you. And I was thinking, did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, would they have read this before? And so when I did a little research, it looks like this was written by Isaiah about somewhere between 80 and maybe 120 years before Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were exiled. And so they very well could have. It didn't, I couldn't tell you for sure. I would have to maybe do a little more research. I don't know if we could even know for sure, but it seemed like that Isaiah's writings were influential at that time in Judah, which is where these guys came from. So it started making me think, hey, we need to make sure we know the promises that God has for in our lives, because we never know when we might be in a situation that a promise he's made will help us make the right decision and do what God asks us to do. So the next thought that I had was, sometimes choosing to go against God's commandments may seem like a safe choice, but the end result of those choices will always be hurt and death. And so what got me kind of thinking about this was just the fact is, what scares us from making the hard choice sometimes when we know it's the right choice? And I think sometimes as it does look like the safe choice. I mean, for them, they could even maybe justified, hey, God's got us here for a reason. It's not going to be his will for us to be thrown in the furnace. Let's, just bow down to the idol and live to fight another day. And also, when he looks at this is the king that's asking. This king has so much power and riches and blessings. And we didn't read it, but in the first chapter of second chapter of Daniel, before he interpreted the dream, Daniel talked to the king about, hey, God's put you in this position of power. He's got you here for a reason. He delivered us to you, but that's part of his plan. And so they could justify, hey, we could, obviously, if the king's asking us to do this, he's got all this money and power, maybe he's on to something there. And I just think in my own life, sometimes I look at some of these ultra successful people that the world would say are successful, whether it's, some of the tech giants or the financial gurus or the politicians or whoever that have all this money, more money than I could ever imagine. I hear about them donating billions or millions to space travel and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, man, if I just had, one of those millions to do something, that would be awesome. And so I start looking at these people and then seeing how evil some of them live their lives outwardly. Not all of them, but you see some of them. And it's like, but they still seem to be so blessed. They still seem to have all this money and seem to be happy. But and I feel like sometimes when I'm making the right choices, my life just becomes harder and harder in some ways. And so, trying to justify, hey, this isn't going to really hurt anyone if I do this. It might turn better off for me. But when we start to think of that way, we're putting our eyes on the wrong thing. And I realized that. And when I started thinking about it, I came across this passage in Psalm 73, where the psalmist kind of goes through all these thoughts in his own mind. And so I just wanted to share that with you, because after reading it, it was very, it put things in perspective for me. It says, surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They are free from common human burdens. They are not plagued by human ills. Their pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence. From their callous hearts comes iniquity. Their evil imaginations have no limits. They scoff and speak with malice. With arrogance they threaten oppression. Their mouths lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth. Therefore, their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. They say, how would God know? Does the Most High know anything? This is what the wicked are like. Always free of care, they go on amassing wealth. Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and have washed my hands in innocence. All day long I have been afflicted, and every morning brings new punishments. If I had spoken out like that, I would have betrayed your children. When I tried to understand all this, it deeply troubled me until I entered the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their final destiny. Surely you place them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly are they destroyed completely and swept away by terrors. They are like a dream when one awakes. When you arise, O Lord, you will despise them as fantasies. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you. Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it's good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds. And so when I read that, I realized, when I try to make these justifications for making a bad decision or for not doing what the Lord wants me to do, it might be hard. I'm thinking about the wrong things. I'm thinking about the things that I've got here on earth. My health, my life, my money, things like that. And what I need to be focused on is God and my relationship with him, because that's my heart. That's what I love more than anything. And God's the one who has the ability to bless me or not bless me. And one day, when I die, he's who's going to save me, and I'm going to go live with him forever. For these people who sometimes I look to who do the wrong things and seem to be blessed, this life is the best it's ever going to get for them, because when they die, their money, their possessions, all that stuff's going to be given to someone else. And, they're going to have to answer for their decision on whether or not to trust in God. And, that's what matters at the end. And so the last thought that I had was, choosing to do the right thing in the face of danger brings glory to God, regardless of the outcome. Most of us live our lives wanting to have some sort of lasting purpose. And what better purpose for our lives than to bring glory to God? That's the sort of thing that will last forever. We're still reading about these three guys 2,500 years after they lived because of the decisions that they made for God. I know that all of us can probably think of people in our past who have made decisions or said things to us that we still find comfort in today, and we still remember. And even the king's heart here at the end seems to be changed again. He said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own. And then he talked about how he was going to make a decree that nobody say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And because these three guys stood up to God, stood up to the king, and God showed up to deliver them, God's name was praised. And not many things get our attention and command and our respect as much as hearing about someone showing courage in the face of adversity. it's sometimes even more the case when that courage costs someone their life. I gave Josiah a book that I read when I was, I guess, probably in my early 20s. It's a book called Jesus Freaks, and it's a book about martyrs, Christian martyrs. And in almost every story in that book, the Lord is glorified in what has taken place. And in some of them, it talks about how God shows up miraculously and causes life to be better for them right before the end. Or, they have these visions of God and they proclaim him to others. And even sometimes after the fact, the people who were responsible for killing them had a change of heart and were converted. And so Jesus says, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. And Jesus demonstrated that for us on the cross when he died for our sins. When he took the place, he made that hard decision to die on the cross for people who he knew were going to do terrible and horrible things. And he's offered that as that salvation that he provided by taking the place for us. He's offered that freely to anyone who will accept it. And so today, in just thinking about this story, I would just ask, have you accepted his salvation? If not, it's a free gift and you can accept him today. Do you need to stand up and do the right thing more often in the face of adversity and trust that God will handle the circumstance? I can tell you that I do, as I've been very challenged as I've been reading that even in some of the small things that I think aren't that big of a deal, I need to make sure that, I'm doing the right thing. Do you need to focus more on Jesus and how your relationship with him is more valuable than anything this world has to offer? I know, and just thinking about, like I said, being envious sometimes of those who don't follow God and seem to have it all. Do you need to focus more on Jesus and realizing that he's more valuable than anything the world has to offer?